Nero Wolfe and the Secret. Written in sauce. A Nero Wolfe story. You'd think that if a man's devoted his whole life to avoiding emotional entanglements, unpredictability, and unwashed strangers, he'd be safe from a culinary chemist with a sob story and a casserole. But not in this city. Not in this brownstone. It started with risotto. Mushroom risotto, to be exact. Porcini, creamy as all get out, with a fleck of saffron and a slow, smug steam that slithered toward Wolfe's nose like it had its own agenda. I opened the door at precisely 11:08 a.m. because Fritz had a nose for timing and Wolfe had a nose for sabotage. The woman standing outside held the dish like it might explode if jostled. She wore a navy trench coat buttoned high despite the May humidity and carried a canvas portfolio case tucked under one arm like a hostage. Her shoes were the kind that meant business meetings and broken sidewalks, and her expression was pure desperation garnished with defiance. I didn't ask what she wanted. I just moved aside and let the risotto in. I led her to the front room. Wolfe hadn't budged from the red chair near the window. His eyes flicked toward the dish, then to her face, then back to the chair arm where his index finger resumed its tapping, a Morse code of measured distaste. "My name is Dr. Celia Moray," she said, placing the risotto gently on the table. "I know you don't take walk-ins. I also know you don't take bribes." She paused, "But I'm hoping you'll make an exception." Wolfe's response was a low grumble that might have been a rejection, a belch, or both. I perched on the arm of the couch, halfway between escort duty and curiosity. "Miss Moray," he said, eyes closed, nostrils faintly flaring. "You've interrupted my post-breakfast digestion. That is an unpardonable offense unless you are a client with a case or an assassin with a pistol." "I'm not either," she said calmly. "But someone's trying to destroy me, and the proof is in that sauce." That earned Wolfe's attention. His eyes opened slowly, the way a bear might wake if you whispered picnic too close to its cave. "You are being metaphorical," he stated, like it was a challenge. "Number, I'm being very literal." She reached into the portfolio case and pulled out a menu. Thick cream cardstock, embossed logo from Corto e Fiero, the kind of Italian joint that serves time air with a side of existential guilt and charges triple digits for the privilege. I'd heard of it. Wolfe had scoffed at it, though he'd secretly borrowed one of their truffle techniques for Fritz to trial. Celia laid the menu flat, then flipped it over. On the back there were scribbles, tiny measurements, some chemical symbols, and something else. A few notes in shorthand, the kind secretaries used back when smoking at your desk was patriotic. She tapped one of the lines. "This is a coded recipe. It's not mine, and I think it's being used to sabotage me." Wolfe sighed. "You are a chef?" "Culinary chemist," she corrected. "I design the molecular profiles of sauces and oils used in high-end restaurants. My lab is in the West Village. A week ago, I started noticing inconsistencies in my formulations, off flavors, spoiled emulsions, but only in the dishes associated with a certain client. Let me guess." I chimed in. "This high-paying, high-risk client happens to be Corto e Fiero." Her nod was curt. "And someone altered one of my recipes before it reached their test kitchen. Subtly, but enough to make diners ill." That made Wolfe sit upright slightly. Poisoned pasta would get his attention faster than a tax audit. I asked the obvious. "Why come here? Shouldn't this be a matter for food safety or your legal team?" Celia exhaled. "I tried, quietly. Then last night someone broke into my lab. They didn't steal anything. They rearranged my spice rack." Wolfe snorted. "Miss Moray, I detest melodrama." "So do I," she snapped. "But one bottle, my cayenne tincture, was opened and resealed. A fingerprint smudged on the glass. It was deliberate." A message Wolfe went still. His fingers curled inward, slowly, like an orchid at dusk. "You believe," he said slowly, that someone is sabotaging your work by interfering with your recipes to damage your professional standing or perhaps cause physical harm to patrons. And they are mocking you while doing so. I know it, she replied, but I can't prove it, not yet. And I need someone who can think ahead of whoever's doing this. I watched Wolfe's expression shift from disdain to faint irritation, the way it always did when someone cleverer than she looked dared him to care. The man didn't like being baited, but he liked mystery less. You brought the risotto as what? Evidence? As an example. It's been altered. Just enough. I stood and walked over. The aroma was perfect. Fritz would have sniffed it from the kitchen and raised an eyebrow. I dipped a spoon in. Tastes fine to me. Try the aftertaste, she said. About 5 seconds in. I waited. Sure enough, a bitter metallic trail cut through the umami like a blade through cream. Quinine? I asked. Close, she said, but not something commercially available, and it wasn't in my formula. Wolfe gave one final grunt. Archie, have Fritz analyze that sample. Carefully. I nodded. You're taking the case? He scowled. Don't be vulgar. I'm tolerating it. There is a distinction. Celia smiled faintly. That's all I need. Wolfe leaned back again, eyes closing. You are mistaken. What you need is protection from ruin, identification of a saboteur, and restoration of your reputation. What you have is an irritable gourmand with sedentary habits and a moderately useful assistant. Hey, I muttered. However, he continued, if the truth is in the sauce, I shall find it. You will leave the menu, the risotto, and a list of every individual with access to your formulations. She nodded, rising. I'll have it to you within the hour. As I walked her out, she hesitated on the steps. He won't like what he finds. I grinned. Lady, he never does. That's what makes it fun. Back inside, Wolfe hadn't moved. Archie, prepare a file, title it, The Sauce Manuscript, and do not permit Fritz to eat that risotto. I already slapped his hand once. Slap harder. And with that, the brownstone slipped into what I like to call preliminary disturbance mode, the part where Wolfe pretends he isn't invested while mentally assembling the universe into squares of logic and contradiction. I didn't know who messed with Celia's sauces, but I was willing to bet good bourbon that Wolfe already suspected they hadn't just tampered with food. They'd tampered with art, with order, with flavor, which in Wolfe's house was grounds for war. Fritz was halfway through searing a pork tenderloin when I entered the kitchen with the risotto. He didn't look up from the pan. He could tell from the sound of my shoes that I was coming in with trouble. That, and the fact that I was holding a perfectly plated dish we hadn't cooked. Don't touch it, I warned. He gave me a look that could make cheese curdle. That is a crime, he said. Risotto left uncovered like that. Who would do such a thing? Someone looking to commit a different kind of crime, I said. Boss wants it tested. Carefully. Something about an altered molecular profile, and before you ask, no, I don't know what that means either. Fritz frowned, gently slid the pork off the heat, and took the risotto like it was radioactive. Is this about the woman? The woman, the sauce, the fingerprints, the sabotage? Take your pick. Fritz muttered something in German that probably wasn't about the weather and vanished toward his pantry lab, where he kept equipment no one else in the house was allowed to touch. I left him to it and returned to Wolfe, who had not moved from his chair but had, in the time I was gone, arranged his fingers into a steeple, his standard pose when beginning to mentally disassemble the universe. The menu was in her handwriting, he asked. Mostly, but the shorthand looked different. Sloppier. He nodded. A decoy, or a late addition. Sloppy is not her nature. I pulled out my notepad. You want me to track down her list of contacts? Number she will deliver it. You will focus on the restaurant. Corto e fiero. Unless there are two haute cuisine establishments with identical menus and a shared history of molecular arrogance. Got it. I want the name of the executive chef, the ownership structure, the patrons, investors, critics, anyone who would suffer if their reputation were overcooked. Starting to sound like a 5-course motive. Wolfe opened one eye. Flippancy is your compensation, not your contribution. Get me names. I suited up, grabbed my notebook, and stepped into the sticky spring air of Manhattan, where pretension cost double if it came with wine pairing. The restaurant sat like a temple on a gentrified block. Polished brass signage, frosted glass, no visible prices. I walked in like I had a reservation and the moral right to be there, which meant no one stopped me. Inside, the hostess was tall, unsmiling, and probably fluent in 5 kinds of judgment. I flashed a grin. Archie Goodwin, food blogger, private table? She narrowed her eyes. We don't do walk-ins. Then let's pretend this is a stroll-through. Before she could summon security or a vegan curse, a man appeared behind her, mid-40s, Mediterranean tan, crisp suit, and eyes like a knife that had been recently sharpened. He extended a hand. I am Lorenzo Greco, executive chef. You wanted to speak with someone. Bingo. I'm interested in your sauces, I said, pulling out my notebook. Word is you've had a few unexpected variations. Lorenzo's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes did. He motioned me to the side. You're not a blogger. Correct. You're with a lawyer. Worse, I'm with Nero Wolfe. That landed. He knew the name. He took a slow breath, like he was deciding whether to hit me or ask for help. Come with me. We stepped into a narrow hallway, then a glass-walled prep room that looked like it was borrowed from a sci-fi film. Beakers, scales, precision burners. One guy in a lab coat was using a pipette on duck confit like it owed him money. We've had a few inconsistencies, Lorenzo said. Minor. Most diners didn't notice. But some did. A few. We comped their meals. But our reputation, well, you understand. I understand sabotage, I said, especially when it comes in the form of a sauce you didn't approve. Lorenzo stiffened. Who told you? I didn't answer. He folded his arms. Celia Moret is brilliant, also unstable. She's threatened to walk away from this project twice in 6 months. Why? Creative control. Ego. And because she believes she owns every idea that comes out of her head. I gave him a look. She doesn't. She was under contract. We commissioned those sauce profiles. Paid handsomely. I jotted it down. Anyone else who had access to her recipes? The lab staff. Myself. A few assistants. But the formulas were stored in a secure digital system. And yet, someone altered one. He didn't answer. Just stared at me, jaw tight. You're not going public with this, he said. No, I said. But you're not off the griddle. I left him stewing in his own reduction and headed back to the brownstone. By the time I got in, Fritz was waiting. Tell him, he said, jerking his thumb toward the office. Wolfe had shifted to his desk, hands flat on the blotter. Fritz gave the report without preamble. There was quinoline in the sauce, he said. Not enough to sicken, but it should not have been there. It altered the base pH and the taste. Wolfe didn't blink. Intentionally. Without question, it was added after initial preparation. Not during? Number it was laced post-cooking by someone who wanted it to taste off. Sabotage, Wolfe said. Sabotage, Fritz confirmed. I whistled. So either someone at Corto e Fiero is tampering with Celia's formulas, or someone is tampering with her. Wolfe tapped his fingers once. The difference is immaterial. The motive lies in perception. That's Wolfe speak for Someone wants her to look incompetent or insane. Just then, the bell rang. I headed to the door. It was Celia, clutching a folded sheet and visibly rattled. "I brought the list," she said. "But I also brought this." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were 2 photographs. One showed her lab, pristine. The other, taken the night before, showed a single spice jar turned sideways, labeled Capsicum Extract A3, her cayenne. Under the image, scrawled in black marker, "Told you I could spice things up." I looked at her. "Did you show this to anyone else?" "Number, not even my assistant." I turned back to Wolfe. "Well, we've got a message." He said nothing, just reached for the photograph and examined it under the desk lamp, frowning like it had insulted his mother. "Archie," he said at last, voice low, "get me Saul Panzer." That meant one thing. Someone had crossed a line, and Wolfe, from the comfort of his chair, was about to push back. By the time Saul Panzer showed up, Wolfe had already shut himself into the plant rooms for his sacred afternoon orchid ritual, which was about as interruptible as a lunar eclipse. That gave me 30 minutes to brief Saul in the front room with the photos, the spice sabotage note, and the kind of summary that only a man who types 90 words per minute and eats fast could deliver. Saul, as usual, said little, but his eyebrows did all the work. He inspected the photo of the turned spice jar and the handwriting on the label like he was reading a confession letter in invisible ink. "This is deliberate," he muttered, echoing Fritz, "and arrogant. Also theatrical," I added. "Someone's trying to rattle her. Or draw her out." I nodded toward the envelope. "The victim's a culinary chemist. The client is a 3-star Italian ego factory, and somebody's messing with her formulas, maybe to ruin her, maybe to frame her, maybe just for the thrill. Wolfe thinks the motive is in perception." Saul snorted. "It always is." We didn't need Wolfe's blessing to get moving. Saul would do what Saul did best, dig around without leaving footprints. My job was less subtle. I decided it was time to get friendly with the names behind the sources. Celia had left a list of 4 people who had direct or partial access to her lab work. I went through them one by one. First up was Elliot Merton, co-director of the Corto A Fiero molecular program, and a textbook definition of polished contempt. He answered the door of his Chelsea condo wearing loafers that cost more than my rent, and a silk robe that shouldn't have been worn in daylight. I already told the police. "Oh, wait, you're not the police." "Nope. Archie Goodwin, investigating inconsistencies in a sauce that nearly got someone publicly humiliated. Or worse." He sighed theatrically and leaned against the doorframe. "Let me guess. Celia's behind this?" "She's the one being sabotaged." He laughed. "She's the one always claiming she's being sabotaged. You ever work with a genius? They think paranoia is a skill." I stayed quiet. "Look, I'll tell you what I told Lorenzo," he said. "She guards her recipes like state secrets. Even I don't have the full breakdowns. Just test samples. We make refinements here and there, but she insists on final control." "Ever disagree on anything?" "Only everything," he said, smiling. "Celia has this idea that science and artistry should never be touched by finance. Unfortunately, restaurants run on finance and reputations. Is that a motive? For what? Tainting her own sauces? Please, she's too vain for that." I made a note anyway. Second was Nina Vornik, Celia's lab assistant. She met me at a coffee shop on the Lower East Side where the tea smelled like philosophy, and the barista wore a beret unironically. "I'm not supposed to talk to anyone," she said as she slid into the booth. "Good. Then we're starting on the same page." She fidgeted with her scarf. Early 20s, eyes alert but nervous in that way you get when your job includes secrets you can't admit you know. "Did you see the spice rack after the break-in?" "Yes," she whispered. "And the message?" I didn't say anything because, Well, because I thought Celia had staged it. Staged it? She's been under pressure lately. The restaurant's been breathing down her neck about deadlines, and some of the early tests didn't work. I thought maybe, I don't know, she wanted attention. That sounded more like fear than certainty. I leaned in. Be straight with me, Nina. Do you think Celia's unstable? I think she's brilliant. And brilliant people don't always notice when they're unraveling. She gave me a hesitant look. Elliot's been pushing to take over some of her formulas. Said it would streamline production. Lorenzo didn't object. Now we were getting somewhere. Did Celia know? She suspected. She said someone was copying her work. The shorthand notes? She said they were planted. That matched what Wolfe had suspected. I scribbled the name Elliot in bolder ink. The third suspect on the list was Lorenzo Greco himself, whom I'd already met, but I dropped by the restaurant again that evening just in time to catch the tail end of service. He pulled me into the office, looking more ruffled than he had before. Someone's been talking, he said. I've been asking. He gestured toward a file folder. Celia sent me an email today. Said she's suspending all source consultations pending an internal investigation. That's a direct hit on our PR. Maybe that's the idea. You think I did this? He looked genuinely offended. Sabotaged the thing I've sunk half my savings into? Or maybe protect it from scandal? Lorenzo shook his head. If I wanted Celia out, I'd fire her. I wouldn't need theatrics. That's when he said something interesting. She already accused Elliot of tampering. Twice. Once over a temperature reading. Once over a mislabeled vial, mislabeled cayenne. Number tarragon, different herb, same playbook. The last suspect was a wild card, Jasper Kane, an investor in the restaurant and an amateur flavor theorist, which, near as I could tell, meant he had strong opinions and a trust fund. I met him in a cigar lounge that smelled like privilege and delusion. She's dangerous, he said flatly. Celia thinks she's a god. People like that don't care who they hurt. Did she hurt you? She embarrassed me. I suggested a small tweak to her smoked vanilla reduction, and she laughed. In front of the kitchen staff. You tweak people often. I fund innovation, he said, puffing like a steamboat. But she doesn't want innovation. She wants control. And you? He smiled without warmth. I want results. I left with more than enough kindling for Wolfe's fire. Each of them had motive. Each of them had opportunity. And each of them seemed convinced Celia was the real threat. When I returned, Wolfe was in the office, reading Celia's list. Fritz had delivered dinner. Pork, perfectly pink, with a rosemary glaze I'd sell my right eye for. I gave him the rundown while Wolfe ate. He didn't interrupt until I mentioned Nina's claim that Celia might have staged the sabotage herself. She's young, Wolfe said, and impressionable. I doubt her interpretation is objective. But it's a theory. It's a distraction. He put down his fork and wiped his mouth with the kind of care you'd give a fragile glass. We are not dealing with a personal vendetta, he said. We are dealing with performance manipulation. Celia's creations are being altered not to destroy her, but to devalue her. That is far more dangerous. Meaning? Someone wants her genius to seem like accident, so they can profit from it. And you think it's Elliot? I think it's all four, he said. Each with a finger in the pot, but only one turned up the heat. I leaned back. So, what's the move? Wolfe stared at the menu Celia had left. We invite them in, one by one, and we serve them sauce. That could mean a dozen things in Wolfe speak. I didn't bother decoding it. I knew the moment the invites went out, the brownstone would stop being a sanctuary and turn into a crucible, and Nero Wolfe, from his chair, would turn up the flame. By the next morning, Wolfe had drawn up what he called a social culinary web. That's his phrase, not mine. It was a chart scrawled on his notepad with arrows, initials, and enough Latin phrases to make me wish I'd paid more attention in high school. But it boiled down to this. Every person we'd talked to, Celia, Elliot, Nina, Lorenzo, and Jasper, was either stealing, leveraging, manipulating, or outright torching someone else's reputation, all while pretending to care about food. And Wolfe, having declared himself temporarily immovable pending a bout of intellectual digestion, tossed me the task of poking the bee's nest some more. His exact words, "Get in the pot and stir." So that morning I started with Elliot Merton again. This time I didn't knock. I walked into the lab at Corto e Fiero just after 10, flashing the same confident smile I use on doormen, bartenders, and suspicious nuns. Elliot was hunched over a digital scale, measuring something the consistency of lemon curd into shot glasses. "Back so soon," he said without looking up. "Curiosity," I replied. "The good kind. How many people have access to Celia's private sauce formulations on your internal system?" He paused. "Technically, 2. Me and Lorenzo, but she guards that data like it's the Pentagon." "Right, yet you've had samples in testing that didn't match her original flavor profiles." "I don't write the codes," he said. "I just cook what's there." "But you've logged into her folders." "Not without her password. She changes it weekly. She doesn't even trust Nina with it." That was interesting since Nina had said she'd seen Celia's recipes before testing. Either someone was lying, or Celia had more trust in her assistant than she let on. Elliot wiped his hands on a towel. "Look, Archie, if someone's sabotaging Celia, it's not me. I need her to succeed. Her failure makes me look incompetent. Unless you replace her." His jaw tensed. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. Investors expect innovation. Jasper expects returns. Lorenzo expects harmony. Celia expects worship." He turned away and refocused on his ingredients. If someone is altering her work, they're doing it to push her out, not to frame her. Now that was a distinction. Not to pin the crime on her, but to make her look obsolete. From there, I swung by Celia's lab. She wasn't in, but Nina was. She let me in and handed over a printout of the recipes Celia had flagged as suspect. There were annotations in 3 different inks, shorthand, notes and symbols I didn't understand. But I recognized one thing immediately. The shorthand was different. Some letters were formed with longer tails, and the spacing between them varied. "Did you write these?" I asked Nina. She hesitated. "Number." But I saw Celia working on them. "Which part?" "She wrote the base formulation. The rest was added later." "And you don't know who?" She swallowed. "She said she didn't. But I think she does. Or suspects." I folded the sheet and slipped it in my pocket. "Last question. Who's the last person to leave this lab each night?" "Usually me." "Did you lock up last Friday?" "Yes." "And when did she find the spice rack had been rearranged?" "Saturday morning. She was here before me. The door hadn't been forced." So the intruder either had a key, or Celia had left it unlocked. Or someone close to her, someone she trusted, was the one who did it. As I stepped out, I got a call from Saul. He was standing outside Jasper Kane's brownstone, looking like he was waiting for the butler to finish his breakfast cigar. "Something's off," Saul said. "Kane just got a visit from someone in Lorenzo's PR team. I checked the plates. They belonged to a firm that handled a hush campaign for a restaurant chain accused of foodborne illness last year. That raised a flag the size of a truffle farm." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I asked. "That Jasper's worried this'll go public and wants a backup plan?" "Yeah. Keep eyes on him." I hung up and headed back uptown. Wolfe had come back from the orchids and was in his chair, hands resting on his belly like he was meditating over a soufflé. "Well?" he asked. Elliot's defensive, Nina's conflicted, Lorenzo's cornered, and Jasper's lawyering up, I said. If we're baking this mystery by temperature, things are getting medium rare. He nodded toward the table. I placed the recipe sheets there. He spent 15 minutes comparing the ink, spacing, and notations with the menu Celia had left earlier. I watched him the way you'd watch someone playing chess with ghosts. 2 sets of notes, he said finally. Written at different times. The base recipe is precise. The addenda are performative. Sloppy, as I surmised. And Celia didn't write the additions. Number, but she kept them. To catch someone? To bait someone. Fritz appeared with lunch, a chilled beet soup with creme fraiche, and Wolfe muttered approval without lifting his eyes from the pages. So what's next? I asked. Invite the suspects. All 4. Separately. Individually. For now, one at a time. I want to taste how they squirm before I stir the pot further. That afternoon I called all 4. Elliot agreed immediately, though he asked if Wolfe had a preferred brand of Madeira. Nina hesitated, but eventually accepted. Lorenzo asked if this was a formal inquiry or a culinary critique, and Jasper simply said he was free at any time provided the chairs were leather. The next morning, Elliot arrived first. I showed him into Wolfe's office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk with a bowl of something Fritz had prepared and a single spoon. You will taste this, Wolfe said. Elliot blinked. Excuse me. Taste it and describe it. Elliot complied, frowning as he sipped. Bright, peppery, slightly bitter on the back end. Is that gentian root? No, Wolfe said. It is a test, and you failed. I blinked from my chair. Elliot froze. Wolfe continued. That bitterness is from quinoline, closely related to what was found in the altered risotto. You didn't detect it. That makes you either an incompetent chemist or an innocent man. Elliot looked like he'd just swallowed bad stock. Wolfe dismissed him with a wave. When Lorenzo came, he sat stiffly. Wolfe repeated the test, this time with a different sauce, lighter, more herbal, laced with a whisper of turmeric oil. Lorenzo tasted. Very subtle. Rosemary and something sharp, astringent. You're not far off, Wolfe said. But that sharpness is artificial. It's mimicking celery seed, not present in the base formula. Lorenzo frowned. Why? To see who notices. Wolfe didn't explain further. He just observed. Then he sent him out. Nina arrived pale and quiet. Wolfe offered her a spoon of a sauce almost identical to one of Celia's flagged recipes. She tasted it, blinked, and asked softly, Did Celia make this? No, Wolfe replied. But the person who tampered with it once used a different handwriting style in the notes you copied. Tell me, Miss Vornick, did Celia ever ask you to add anything without telling Elliot? She shook her head. No. Did you ever see Elliot write shorthand? No. But you did see Jasper Kane write it, didn't you? Her eyes widened. Enough, Wolfe said. And then came Jasper. Wolfe didn't offer him a spoon. He simply laid the altered menu and the spice rack photo on the table. Why did you write on her documents? Wolfe asked. I didn't. The shorthand, Wolfe continued, matches a note you left on a memo 6 months ago, a flavor brief for a lemongrass blend. I have a copy. You write your F's with a closed loop and your E's like a child learning cursive. You also dot your I's with a rightward slant. All present here. Kane sat very still. Coincidence. Wolfe lifted a brow. You also left fingerprints on the cayenne jar. Fritz confirmed. That was a lie. But Kane didn't know that. He stood up. This is absurd. Wolfe didn't blink. It's exposure. You altered her recipes to create failure, then intended to have Elliot step in and rescue the project with your supervision. You would have bought her formula in disgrace. Own the chef, own the lab. Kane sneered. You can't prove it, no, Wolfe agreed, but I can inform the Board of Health and the investors and Celia. That was enough. Kane stormed out. I looked at Wolfe. You think he did it? I know he did. Then why not end it now? Because, Wolfe said, reaching for a cigar, we have one more course. I've been working with Wolfe long enough to know that when he says one more course, he doesn't mean dessert. He means one last move, the kind that looks like decoration but hides a blade. And when that move comes after a quiet afternoon in the brownstone where no one breathes too loudly and the orchids have had their chat, it usually means he's already placed the final piece. He's just waiting for the room to catch up. The evening after Cairns' little eruption, Wolfe called me into the office and gave me a short list of names and times. Saul Panzer was already moving on 2 of them. My job was more subtle and more dangerous. Wolfe had an itch that someone had been inside the brownstone, not just metaphorically, but physically, and not Fritz or Saul or me. I want you, he said, to confirm what I suspect. Which is that something here has been tampered with? In the house? Yes. Wolfe never accuses without foundation. If he thought something had been moved, it had been moved. And that narrowed the suspect pool to someone with access and confidence. Not many people matched both. I started with the spice cabinet in the kitchen. Not Fritz's main prep rack, the secondary cabinet where backup ingredients were labeled, sorted alphabetically, and never touched unless we ran out. Wolfe hadn't even entered the kitchen that week, so if something had been tampered with, it wouldn't be under his nose. I checked every jar. Nothing obvious. But when I hit the back of the second shelf, I found it. Capsicum B2, a backup vial, cap snug, label crisp. Too crisp. Every other label had a faint yellowing at the edge. Kitchen humidity over time. But this one looked fresh. I unscrewed it and sniffed. It wasn't cayenne. It wasn't even close. It was mace. I took it straight to Wolfe. He held the jar in his hand like it was evidence in a murder trial. He turned it twice, examined the label, and placed it on the desk with a grimace. This, he said, was placed here to provoke a reaction, but not from me. From Celia? He nodded. Had she seen this herself, she would have assumed you or Fritz mislabeled it. That would have soured her trust. You see? Sabotage by proxy, I said. Make her doubt the only people who believe her. Yes, and worse, make me dismiss her as delusional. That was bold. Bolder than I thought even Kane would risk. You think Kane snuck in and did this himself? Number he would not soil his hands. Someone else. Nina? Wolfe paused. She is loyal, but young, impressionable, and she has been used. He tapped the desk with 2 fingers. Archie, I want her followed, closely, tonight. Saul was already on it. He phoned in just after 7. Nina had left her apartment and taken a cab to a midtown cafe. She wasn't meeting friends. She was meeting Elliot. That sent Wolfe into full statue mode. He sat in silence for a full 10 minutes, fingers locked together, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. When he finally spoke, it was without preamble. They are not lovers. Comforting. But they are conspiring, or rather, he is using her trust. Think she planted the spice jar? She may have thought it was innocent, a simple switch, a harmless favor. Except it wasn't. No. Saul followed Nina back to her apartment around 9. She didn't stop anywhere else. No meetings with Kane. No detours, just a slow, quiet ride home. That meant only one thing. The real trespass wasn't physical, it was psychological. Whoever had reached into this case had done it through manipulation, suggestion, maybe even a hint of fear. The next morning, Wolfe had me bring in Celia again. She arrived at 10 sharp, hair tied back, eyes sharper than usual. Wolfe didn't greet her. He simply gestured to the seat across from him. You brought me back to tell me something, she said. Wolfe didn't answer. He reached into his drawer and pulled out the spice jar, set it on the blotter. "This was found in my kitchen," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "That's mine." "It is not. It is labeled as yours, but it is not cayenne. It is mace." She blinked. "What?" "It was placed there, deliberately, to resemble your product, with the intention that you would find it, accuse someone, and appear irrational." Her voice dropped. "So they want me to lose control?" "Yes." "And they were in your house?" Wolfe's lips tightened. "My assumption is that the person who brought it here did not know what they carried. They believed they were returning a misplaced item. A favor." She sat very still. "Nina." Wolfe said nothing. "I told her I had left a vial behind the other day after bringing you the risotto," she said softly. "She offered to drop it off when she was nearby. I didn't think—" Wolfe waved a hand. "She was exploited." Celia stood, furious now. "They are trying to erase me, one drop of sauce at a time." "They are trying to own you," Wolfe said calmly, "by making you irrelevant." I stood in the corner, arms crossed. "You're sure this wasn't Kane?" "He orchestrated it," Wolfe said. "But the final ingredient was Elliot." I blinked. Elliot planted the altered recipe. Number Elliot suggested to Nina that Celia had been forgetting things, that she had been stressed. He made her doubt. Then he asked her, politely, gently, to help. Why? Because Elliot needed Celia removed without causing scandal. If she melted down on her own, he could step in as a stabilizing force. Celia's hands were shaking now. "And Kane?" she asked. "Kane planned to buy your research in the fallout, quietly, with Elliot in charge of future development." She laughed, bitter. "I designed every formula from scratch. They couldn't replicate them if I handed them a blueprint." "Which is why," Wolfe said, "they chose sabotage over theft." We were quiet for a moment. Then Wolfe leaned forward. "I will call them in," he said. "All of them. Today." "For what?" Celia asked. Wolfe's voice dropped. "To eat." She looked at him, confused. But I understood. He was going to do what he always did when the game was nearly over: set the stage, prepare the bait, and then pull the truth out from their mouths like a thread from a hymn. Except this time, the thread was laced with fire. By midday, the invitations were out. Formal summons typed by me, reviewed by Wolfe, and sent with just the right touch of authority and mystery. Not polite requests. Not casual inquiries. These were demands for presence, penned as if failing to attend might result in social extinction. Wolfe liked to operate with gravity, and when he wanted gravity, he used my typewriter like it was a guillotine. We were calling them all: Lorenzo, Elliot, Jasper Kane, and Nina. Celia would be present too, seated not as the accused or victim, but as a quiet observer of what Wolfe called the unmasking. He didn't say it aloud, but I knew the feeling. It was when the temperature in the room rises, not from the radiator, but from truth pressing against the walls like a swelling boil. Someone always bursts. Wolfe had Fritz prepare 4 sauces. Not meals. Just sauces. Each had a slight, intentional variation. Some ingredient switched, some chemical signature tweaked, each designed to mimic either Celia's original profile or the tampered versions. Wolfe wanted them tasted in sequence, without warning, in front of everyone. The table was set. The guests began arriving promptly at 3. Lorenzo first, suave and tense, like he was late to his own funeral. Elliot followed, all casual pretense and overcompensation. Nina came in quietly, avoiding everyone's eyes. And finally, Jasper Kane, arriving 5 minutes late, with a silk scarf knotted like a badge and a face that screamed impatience. They were seated not in Wolfe's office, but the dining room, a rare move. Wolfe remained at the head of the table, immovable. Celia sat to his right, silent. I leaned against the door frame, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the room for twitches. Fritz emerged with the first round of sauces, each in a small porcelain cup accompanied by bread crisps for dipping. The guests eyed them as if Wolfe had passed out poison. "You will each sample," Wolfe said. "Do so without question." No one moved for a second. Then Lorenzo dipped his crisp and tasted. Elliot followed, then Kane, then Nina. Reactions varied. Lorenzo nodded, neutral. Elliot smiled faintly. Nina barely registered anything. Kane gave a small grunt, then reached for a napkin. "This is one of Celia's," Wolfe said. "Original, untampered, designed for red meat, winter menu, aromatic base with cayenne threading." "Miss Vornick?" Nina looked up. "It's sharper than I remember." "Because what you remember was altered." He didn't let them react. He waved Fritz in again. Second round, new sauce. Same setup. This time, Kane coughed softly after tasting. "Bitter," he said. "Unbalanced," Elliot chimed in. "Too acidic." Wolfe nodded. This was the tampered version, the one served in risotto. A pause? Then Wolfe turned to Lorenzo. "Did you taste this version during trials?" Lorenzo hesitated. "Number." But Elliot flagged one of the batches for correction. "I assumed—" "You assumed wrong," Wolfe snapped. Elliot did not report it, because he already knew. Elliot blinked. "Excuse me?" "You have access to the backup lab samples," Wolfe said. "You control inventory flow, and you coached Miss Vornick into returning the altered vial to my kitchen, where it would be mistaken for incompetence." Elliot's face turned a shade paler. "I never—" Wolfe raised a hand. "Enough. Your fingerprints are on nothing, which is how you operate. But Miss Vornick's trust, that you handled like a chef plating deceit." All eyes turned to Nina, who was trembling now. "I didn't know," she said. "He told me the jar was mislabeled. That you'd noticed it. I thought I was helping." Wolfe turned to her, his voice quieter now. "And so you were used." She looked at Elliot, who looked suddenly alone. Wolfe gestured, and Fritz brought the third sauce. This one was familiar. The same molecular structure from the formula that had been anonymously mailed to a rival lab. A fact we hadn't yet revealed. "Try it," Wolfe said. Kane sniffed it suspiciously. "Go on," Wolfe said again. "It's the one you attempted to have registered under your name at Deverak's labs 3 days ago." That did it. Kane dropped the crisp. "I don't know what—" "Mr. Panzer retrieved your signature from their receptionist log," Wolfe said, "and the envelope with the formula was sent from your company's internal courier. A careless detail." Kane straightened, arms folding. "You have no proof I made the recipe?" "No," Wolfe said. "But we know it originated from Celia's original formula, modified by Elliot. You were merely the broker." Celia sat forward now, hands clenched in her lap. "You were going to steal it," she said. Kane didn't reply, but his silence was louder than any denial. Then Wolfe leaned back, calm, cold. "Miss Moray," he said, "do you have any final questions for Mr. Kane?" Celia's voice was steady. "Yes, why me?" Kane licked his lips. "Because you don't share." She nodded once. No more words needed. Wolfe closed the folder before him. "I am not the law," he said, "but I do know a well-cooked deception when I taste one. Mr. Kane, I will be forwarding my findings to the restaurant's ownership and investors. Miss Moray's reputation will remain intact. Yours will not." Kane stood up. "You'll hear from my attorneys." "I doubt it," Wolfe said. "You'd need to explain what the attorneys are defending." Kane walked out without looking back. Elliot followed, face blank. Nina hesitated. "Miss Vornick," Wolfe said. "You may stay." She looked surprised. "Your actions, though ill-advised, were not malicious. You may choose better allies next time." Lorenzo stood now, adjusting his collar. I suppose this means the project is dead. No, Wolfe said. It means it is back in the hands of its creator. He glanced towards Celia. Use them wisely. After they all left, Wolfe remained seated, fingers pressed together, gaze distant. Celia approached him, slowly. Thank you. He gave a small grunt. You were correct. There was something in the sauce, something unpalatable. I quipped from the doorway. Bitterness, betrayal, and just a dash of ambition. Wolfe snorted. Serve cold, but never undercooked. And with that, the storm passed. The brownstone, once again, returned to quiet. You'd think once the main act is over, the crooks unmasked, the secrets unveiled, the sources accounted for, the curtain would drop and everyone would go home. Not in Wolfe's world. For him, the aftermath is just another course. Not as spicy, maybe, but important. It's the course where reputations are clarified, alignments reset, and every piece is nudged into its rightful spot before he can enjoy his dinner in peace. The revelation might have cracked the case wide open, but Wolfe wasn't finished. Number now came the positioning. Celia didn't leave the brownstone that night. Wolfe asked Fritz to prepare a private meal for her in the dining room. No audience, no talk of sabotage, no courtroom drama in casserole form. Just food, served correctly, respectfully, as if to cleanse the emotional palate. I respected that. So did she. Meanwhile, I was instructed to make a few calls. The first was to Corto e Fierro's managing partner, a man named Russell Bent, who had about as much interest in gastronomy as Wolfe had in morning jogs. Russell was money through and through. He cared about margins, public relations, and how fast he could swap a scandal for a trend. Wolfe had me deliver the facts cleanly. Celia had been targeted, not incompetent. Kane had manipulated the system, and Elliot had facilitated it with enough deniability to skate past prosecution, but not consequence. Russell asked one question. Is she salvageable? To which I replied, only if you act like she's irreplaceable. Wolfe had given me that line. It worked. Bent agreed to issue a public statement reaffirming their trust in Celia's work and announcing Elliot's departure from the creative team. As for Kane, his investor privileges were under immediate review, which is code for the ship is leaving without you, pal. The second call was to Deverax Labs, where I spoke to the director. Saul had already warned them about the forged sauce formula Jasper Kane tried to register under his name. They were understandably twitchy. Labs like that don't like being involved in scandal, and Wolfe's reputation had done most of the arm-twisting already. The lab agreed to pull the registration attempt, flag Kane's name in their system, and notify Wolfe if any similar documents surfaced again. A quiet burial of an attempted intellectual theft. But Wolfe wasn't interested in revenge, just results. While I handled the calls, Wolfe sat in the office with Celia. I didn't eavesdrop. They were talking low, too low for me to pick up from the hallway, but I caught glimpses of her body language. First defensive, arms crossed, then slower, shoulders relaxed. She even smiled once, though briefly. Later, when she left for the night, she passed me in the hall. He's not what I expected, she said. He never is. She paused at the door. You think he enjoys it? The game? I shrugged. He enjoys winning, but he prefers justice, even if it's boring. She gave me a long look, then walked out into the evening. Wolfe didn't speak again until after dinner. I found him in the office, sipping beer and staring at the empty risotto dish from 2 days earlier, which Fritz had left on the corner cabinet out of some symbolic impulse I didn't understand. Maybe it was a trophy. He nearly succeeded, Wolfe said. Kane? Yes. His approach was not forceful, not aggressive, but slow, persistent. He chipped away at perception, ours, Celia's, the kitchen's. That is how empires fall. Or careers, I said. He looked over at me. Or people. There was a silence, and for once, I let it sit. Then Wolfe shifted in his chair. Mr. Greco will recover, Miss Vornick will learn, Elliot will find another kitchen to corrupt, and Kane will pursue other investments. I nodded. But they'll remember. Yes, he said. And Celia will cook again. He set his glass down. You see, Archie, there are many ways to ruin a person. Some are loud, some are subtle. This was the latter. It required intellect to match it. I leaned against the wall. You're proud. I am satisfied, he corrected. Fritz entered then, carrying a fresh batch of fig tartlets. Perfect timing, I muttered. Wolfe gestured for the plate to be placed on the desk. Fritz complied without a word and left. You know what I find most distasteful? Wolfe said, lifting a tartlet with delicate fingers. What? The assumption that food is only chemistry, that its value lies solely in its components, that sources can be stolen like patents and reputations shredded like menus. Then what is food? Asked, playing along. He took a bite, closed his eyes. It is identity, he said. It is memory. It is a signature you can taste. You do not steal that. You respect it. I let him enjoy the silence. Then I asked, So does this mean you'll let Corto Faro send a gift basket? He opened one eye. If it contains pickled squash blossoms and aged Modena vinegar, perhaps. The next morning, I typed up the case file. Wolfe dictated the summary. As usual, he insisted I avoid sensationalism. He didn't want headlines or glory, just the facts, just the arrangement of the puzzle in its correct form. When I finished, I handed him the final page. He read it slowly, nodding. Title it, The Secret Written in Source. Sure, I said. You want it published? Number. But I want it remembered. Later, I returned to the kitchen and found Fritz humming softly while stirring a new reduction. What now? I asked. Summer menu, he said. Mr. Wolfe requested something lighter. I smiled. The weight had lifted. Back in the office, Wolfe had already returned to his orchids, the mystery behind him, the quiet restored. But I knew better. There's always another ingredient waiting to go missing. If you ever want to see Wolfe in his element, I mean really in it, not just tossing barbs from his chair or pontificating on the ethics of eggplant, then watch him host an office gathering. Not the dinner party kind, of course. Wolfe doesn't do hors d'oeuvres and mingling. I'm talking about his favorite brand of gathering, the verbal inquisition. By Friday afternoon, the stage was set. The chairs were arranged with military symmetry. The room smelled faintly of polished leather and controlled intimidation. The air was thick enough to slice. I dusted, checked the thermostat twice, and even repositioned the globe for no reason other than aesthetics. Wolfe insisted we do these things right. The man doesn't break criminals. He breaks certainty. By 3:30, the suspects and witnesses had arrived. One by one, I showed them into the office and watched them squirm into the seats. Lorenzo took the couch, stiff-backed and brooding. Elliot picked the chair nearest the bookshelf, legs crossed too casually. Nina sat close to the far wall, her posture somewhere between guilt and confusion. Jasper Kane took the armchair closest to Wolfe's desk, an unspoken challenge that Wolfe didn't acknowledge. Celia entered last, silent, eyes scanning the room like a general assessing enemy formations. Wolfe waited until everyone was seated before he spoke. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lean forward. He didn't need to. Wolfe's silence was louder than most men's shouting. You all know why you're here, he said, but I will state it plainly. He tapped the rim of his desk with one finger, slow and deliberate. There has been a deliberate, coordinated attempt to undermine Dr. Morey's professional standing. This effort involved the unauthorized alteration of her molecular formulations, the strategic planting of mislabeled ingredients, and the manipulation of a trusted assistant into unwitting complicity. He paused, letting the words settle. Jasper shifted first. This is highly theatrical, Mr. Wolfe. If you're trying to intimidate— I do not intimidate, Wolfe said, cutting him off. I reveal. The intimidation is merely a byproduct. Lorenzo cleared his throat. Are we being accused of something? Because I've cooperated fully. Wolfe raised a hand, and the room stopped. Then he looked at Nina. Miss Vornick, do you remember returning a spice jar to this house? A cayenne tincture? She hesitated. Yes, I thought it belonged to Celia. It did not, Wolfe said. It was mace, mislabeled. It was planted in my cabinet to cause confusion. Tell me, who gave it to you? Her voice trembled. Elliot asked me to take it over. Said it was something Celia had forgotten. Wolfe turned to Elliot, whose face had gone 2 shades lighter. I never said that, Elliot muttered. She must have misunderstood. You said it, Wolfe said, and you knew what was in the jar. You also knew it would be placed near authentic ingredients. Your intent was not to harm anyone directly. It was to plant doubt. Subtle, insidious, and deniable. Celia leaned forward, eyes locked on Elliot. You used her. Elliot looked like he wanted to disappear. It wasn't like that. You wanted to discredit me without having to take the blame, Celia snapped. You thought if I cracked under the pressure, they'd replace me, and you'd be ready to step in. Wolfe turned his attention to Kane now. Mr. Kane, he said, would you like to explain your attempt to patent a near duplicate of Dr. Morey's reduction formula at Deverak's labs? Kane smirked, but his eyes flickered. There's no law against inspiration. There is, however, Wolfe said, a law against theft. And fraud. Your courier signed for the drop-off using your company's billing information. Saul Panzer confirmed it. You intended to register the formula ahead of any scandal and present yourself as a rescue investor, a savior, a creator, when in truth you were neither. Lorenzo stood abruptly. You think I was in on this? Wolfe didn't even blink. Number, you were negligent. You allowed access, failed to protect your consultant, and ignored her warnings. You are guilty of arrogance and laziness. Less criminal, but equally distasteful. I was watching everyone closely. Nina's eyes were rimmed with tears. Lorenzo was shaking his head, still in denial. Elliot looked like a man who had gambled and lost. And Kane, well, he wasn't even angry anymore, just calculating what came next. Celia sat quietly, composed. Wolfe leaned back. The facts are as follows. Celia Morey's sources were sabotaged by internal tampering. Elliot Merton facilitated access to her lab, compromised her assistant, and misdirected blame. Jasper Kane attempted to monetize the fallout. The only crime of Dr. Morey was trusting the wrong people. Elliot opened his mouth. Wolfe cut him off with a flick of the hand. I've already informed your employer of my findings. You will not be returning to the Corto e Fiero project. Mr. Kane, I assume your investment privileges will shortly evaporate. Lorenzo, Wolfe continued, you may continue your restaurant pursuits. But I suggest you learn to protect your assets. He turned to Nina last. Miss Vornick, you are young, and you made a mistake. But you came here today. You stayed. You answered honestly. That matters. Nina nodded, too ashamed to speak. Then Wolfe turned to Celia. I offer no advice, he said. You require none. Celia stood. No, she said, but thank you. The guests filed out slowly, like the final moments of a courtroom drama without the gavels or the applause. No one dared speak. Not to Wolfe. Not to each other. When they were gone, I looked at Wolfe. Not bad. He let out a long breath. Not pleasant either. Still, the sauce is safe. The cook is cleared. The villains slink into the night. Justice served, Wolfe murmured, though never hot. I grinned. You want me to file the final notes? In the red folder, he said. Label it. Kane reduction. Cute, he grunted. a touch of flavor. As I typed up the final pages that night, I thought about the whole affair, not the sabotage or the deception, but the motive behind it all. It wasn't greed, not really. It was ego, pure and distilled. They didn't want to kill Celia's talent. They just wanted to own it. But Wolfe wouldn't let them, and I wouldn't either. If you've ever seen Wolfe at full tilt, well, full verbal tilt, you know the man doesn't shout, wave, or pace. He doesn't storm across rooms or fling paperweights at guilty heads. He sits, he speaks. And when he does, the air gets heavier, like something bigger than all of us is sliding into place. The reveal in Wolfe's world isn't a climax. It's a quiet, inevitable unfolding. One truth after another. No suspense music, just logic snapping shut like a bear trap. The evening after the office gathering, Wolfe finally let the whole thing unspool. Not in front of the suspects, they'd been dismissed. Not in court, not on some stage. Just in his office, to me and Celia, while the windows darkened and the orchids settled in for the night. He'd promised her clarity, and now he delivered it. The first clue, Wolfe said, was the source itself. Celia sat upright in the red chair usually reserved for wary clients and tired suspects. I was at my usual post, notepad in hand, though at this point I could have recited the whole thing from memory. Wolfe continued. When Fritz tested the risotto sample, he detected quinoline, bitter, metallic, precise. Not enough to harm a diner, but enough to disrupt the flavor profile. Such tampering suggested someone who understood molecular gastronomy, not a casual saboteur. Celia nodded slowly. That narrowed it down. Yes, but more important was the method. The alteration occurred post-cooking, a delicate move, designed to mimic error rather than sabotage. That is a psychological tactic. He reached for the spice jar, the infamous mislabeled mace in the cayenne bottle, and held it up like a museum curator presenting a cursed relic. This was placed in my kitchen not to poison, but to confuse. Its true target was not me, nor Fritz. It was you. Celia looked at the jar and exhaled. They wanted me to think I was slipping. Yes, Wolfe said, a culinary gaslight. And Nina, she started, but Wolfe lifted a hand. She was used. Elliot instructed her subtly, under the guise of helpfulness. He framed his suggestion as concern, a misplaced jar, a favor, but he knew it would plant doubt in you. And Cain, Wolfe set the jar down with finality. Cain never touched the ingredients. He orchestrated the plan. He understood that destroying your credibility would allow him to acquire your intellectual property quietly. He had already begun the paperwork to submit your source profile as his own, with Elliot listed as contributor. He never planned to fire you, just render you irrelevant, I interjected. That's why they never made a direct move. They needed her present, but diminished. Someone the board would see as unstable, while Elliot emerged as the steady hand. Wolfe nodded. Sabotage by misdirection, they created chaos and positioned themselves as the solution. Celia rubbed her temples, and I played right into it. No, Wolfe said sharply. You noticed the difference. You sought help. You remained composed. That is why they failed. She looked at him for a long moment. You really hate disorder, don't you? I loathe pretense, he replied. And sabotage masquerading as professionalism is the worst kind of pretense. Fritz entered silently and placed a small tray on the table. Cognac for Wolfe, espresso for Celia, root beer for me. He disappeared before anyone could thank him. Fritz knows when moments need space. Celia sipped her coffee. So what happens now? You resume your work, Wolfe said. You protect your recipes more carefully, and you trust less. Wise advice, she muttered. Not advice, Wolfe corrected. Observation. She smiled faintly. And Cain, she asked. He will be discredited within the industry, quietly, permanently. A man who tampers with taste has no future in fine cuisine. You didn't hand it over to the police. No need, Wolfe said. The court of perception will judge him harshly. As it should, I finished my drink and glanced at Wolfe. So you knew from the beginning it wasn't just about ruined risotto. Of course, he said. No one comes here over risotto. Celia set her cup down. You didn't seem very interested at first. I was gauging sincerity, yours and theirs. Once I saw the source profile and the handwriting inconsistencies, I knew. That quickly? Yes. But you let it play out. Because, Wolfe said, truth is not enough. It must be revealed, witnessed, accepted. I jotted that down. Sounded like one of Wolfe's better throw pillows. Celia stood quietly and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. Why did you help me, really? She asked, not turning around. Wolfe stared at her for a beat. Because someone tried to poison the art. She nodded once and left. Wolfe didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, it was soft. Archie, you may file the notes. In the usual cabinet. Number burn them. This one doesn't need retelling. That surprised me. Burn them? Yes. Let the chefs fight over stars. We've had our course. I didn't press. Some victories are private. Later, I shredded the notes anyway. Well, most of them. I kept the opening paragraph for myself. The part that read, it began with risotto. It ended with ruin. Wolfe would probably call that melodramatic. But to me, it tasted just right. The day after the final reveal was unusually still in the brownstone. Not quiet, mind you, we were always quiet. But this was something else. The kind of stillness that follows a thunderstorm when the ground is wet and the sky pretends it never knew lightning. Wolfe didn't ask me to file anything. He didn't ask for his beer at the usual time either. Just retreated to the plant rooms and stayed there until lunch. That, more than anything, told me the case had stuck to his ribs a little more than usual. I didn't push. I know Wolfe's silences. Some are idle, some are strategic, and some, like this one, are reflective. It's rare, but sometimes a case hits something deeper than professional pride. Sometimes it pokes at a principle he'd rather not have seen bruised. And this time, it wasn't about murder or blackmail or jewels. It was about integrity, flavor, craft. Wolfe doesn't cook, but he respects the ones who do. And someone had tried to turn that respect into a business maneuver. Celia didn't come by that day. I figured she needed space to reclaim her lab, untangle her reputation, and set the knives back in their rightful place. But she did send something, delivered by a boy in a white apron just after lunch. It was a sealed box, wrapped in brown parchment, no card. Inside, 3 glass vials, labeled in her handwriting. The first, porcini reduction, corrected. The second, fire-roasted capsicum, no sabotage. This time, the third, peace offering. For Fritz, there was also a small envelope addressed to Wolfe. I didn't read it. He'd have known if I had. But I watched him as he opened it and read it in one slow pass, eyes narrowing, then relaxing. She's not a sentimentalist, he murmured. No, I said. She's a scientist with a grudge and a memory. Good, Wolfe replied, placing the envelope back in the drawer. They make better allies than clients. I didn't ask what the letter said. I didn't need to. The afternoon passed without incident. I filed a few notes, rearranged the drawer where Wolfe keeps menus and discarded legal threats, and checked in with Saul. He confirmed that Kane had formally withdrawn his application with Deverax Labs and had told a journalist that he was stepping back from flavor innovation to pursue investments in digital food culture. Translation: he'd been burned and was looking for water in a mirage. Elliot, on the other hand, had quietly resigned from Corto e Fierro's molecular kitchen division. Rumor was he was already sniffing around a biotech firm upstate that dealt in synthetic proteins, from sauces to soy slabs. A fitting downgrade, if you ask me. As for Nina Vornik, she'd sent Wolfe a thank-you note. A real one. Handwritten, apologetic, articulate, and, more importantly, not an attempt to justify anything. Wolfe didn't comment on it, but he set it in his top drawer instead of the trash, and that was more than enough to say it had passed his test. That night, Fritz cooked a quiet dinner, herb-basted chicken thighs with a reduced shallot glaze and baked polenta wedges. No fanfare, no theatrics, just competence. Wolfe ate with a little more deliberation than usual. Not more slowly, just more attentively, as if he were reminding himself that food, when unspoiled, is still one of the world's few honest pleasures. After dessert, lemon tarts with whipped basil cream, he pushed his plate back and looked at me. "It was not just an attempt to steal," he said. "No. It was an attempt to redefine." I raised an eyebrow. "Kane and Elliot did not only want credit," Wolfe continued. "They wanted to replace Celia's name with their own, to erase the origin. That is not merely theft, that is revisionism. And that," he added, "is more dangerous." I'd never seen him so sharp over a matter that didn't involve death. But I understood it. It had crawled under his skin because it had mocked the very thing he respected most: authorship, not just in books but in taste, texture, detail. Wolfe doesn't suffer fools, but he despises frauds. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Is it filed?" he asked. "You told me to burn it." "I did. And?" "I burned most of it." He opened one eye. "Archie." "Just the introduction," I said. "For myself. I didn't sign it. Just tucked it away, in case we forget someday that a man tried to fake a genius out of her own sauce." He grunted. "You are an incorrigible romantic." "Number, I just hate bullies." He closed his eyes again. "As do I." The next morning, the brownstone returned to routine. Wolfe rose at the usual time, took his beer with a grumble, read the paper, and returned to his orchids. I answered the mail, intercepted 3 offers for speaking engagements Wolfe would never attend, and declined an invitation for him to judge a food expo in Chicago. He would have hated it. Around noon, I received a call from Corto e Fiero's managing partner, Russell Bent. "I just wanted to thank Mr. Wolfe again," Bent said. "Our brand survived this. We've rehired Dr. Murray on her terms. She deserves that. She does. We've also changed our internal recipe storage process. Wise move. Mr. Wolfe doesn't wish to be named, I assume." "You assume correctly." "Understood. Thank him, please. From all of us." I didn't bother relaying that part to Wolfe. He wasn't in it for gratitude or fame, just for truth, and maybe the occasional preserved truffle. That afternoon I stood by the front window, sipping coffee, watching the spring rain hit the sidewalk. The city was loud again. Horns, engines, ambition, and somewhere out there, I knew, people were still trying to get ahead by stepping on someone else's recipe. But not this time. This time, the thief didn't get away with it. The forger got burned, the assistant learned. And the artist? She got her credit back. Wolfe would say it was balance restored. I'd say it was justice, slow-cooked, reduced, and served with just enough heat. The case was over, the facts had settled, and the brownstone had slipped back into its natural rhythm. Wolfe growling about interruptions, Fritz humming in the kitchen, me pretending to organize files while actually listening to jazz in the front room. And yet, there was a feeling that hadn't quite left. Not the usual self-satisfied glow Wolfe gets after cornering a criminal with 6 sentences and a paper napkin. This was something else. Something heavier. And, dare I say it, more personal. It wasn't that Wolfe cared about Celia Moray, not in any sentimental sense, but she'd stirred something in him, not affection, but alignment. She was methodical, precise and defensive about her craft. She reminded him of himself, though he'd rather gargle tarragon vinegar than admit that. He didn't speak of her for 2 days, didn't mention the case, didn't refer to Kane, Elliot, Nina, or the incident in his kitchen. He acted as though it had never happened. But I knew better. Wolfe's silence was never emptiness. It was processing, brewing, reducing. On the 3rd day, a package arrived. I brought it into the office, sliced the twine, and opened the box. Inside, a single object. A white ceramic plate, glazed and matte, holding a clear glass sphere filled with a thick amber sauce. No card, no note, no explanation. Wolfe looked at it and, for a moment, did nothing. Then he stood, walked over and examined the sphere. Celia's, he said, inspired by the original reduction, infused with saffron, balanced with pomegranate. You can tell that just by looking at it? I asked. I can smell it. He took the plate and carried it to the desk like it was a relic from a lost civilization. Then he sat and stared at it for nearly a minute. Finally, he spoke. She has improved it. She already beat Kane, I said. Why improve it? Because that, Wolfe said, is how you prove ownership. And there it was, the final move in a game no one else even realized they were still playing. Not a lawsuit, not a headline, just a dish. Silent, elegant, unmistakable. Celia hadn't just taken back her name. She'd sealed it. I nodded. Think she'll be all right? She will thrive, Wolfe said. And Kane? We'll invest in dehydrated algae or blockchain kale or some other nonsense. And fail. And Elliot? He will find a home among the mediocre, where his kind belong. Harsh. Factual. Later that day, I walked into the kitchen to find Fritz slicing root vegetables with surgical precision. I mentioned the dish Celia had sent. He nodded, unsurprised. She has courage, he said. The good kind. Quiet. Controlled. She also has Wolfe's respect. Fritz chuckled. That's rarer than white truffles in February. That evening, the house was unusually warm, not from the temperature, but from something else. Something earned. Wolfe read in silence, a faint smirk betraying his otherwise unreadable face. I poured myself a glass of red and leaned back, letting the silence stretch. You know, I said, if someone ever tries to steal your genius, you'll need more than a spice jar and a sauce to prove it. I have you, Wolfe said simply. Flattery? I asked, raising an eyebrow. No, he replied, an unfortunate reality. I laughed, and for once, so did he. Just a quiet puff of air from deep in his chest. The city outside buzzed on, as cities do. But here inside, in the world of orchids, sauces, and strategic justice, balance had been restored. And while Wolfe never chases applause, this case had ended with something better than recognition. Respect, restored, preserved, served. And if you ask me, that's the only recipe Wolfe's ever cared about.